The night this all started, I didn't plan to be out. I was supposed to be at home, sorting through paperwork for the promotion I'd been gunning for, while Amy was out with friends. But as it turned out, some last-minute meetings at work dragged me out to this dimly lit, overpriced bar downtown where a couple of executives were toasting some deal I couldn't care less about. And then I saw her. She didn't see me. She was way too busy with the guy she was pressed up against, laughing in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in years. Her body was all language. Leaning close, her hand brushing over his arm, a coy smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I stood there, trying to tell myself I was just mistaken, that maybe it was just some look-alike in that little black dress I'd never seen her wear before. But then her face tilted up, catching the warm light as she leaned in toward him, her lips grazing his neck. It was unmistakably Amy. For a moment, I didn't feel anything. My brain just shut down, like a fuse blew, and I was standing there holding an empty circuit. My fingers tightened around the edge of a letter I just signed and picked up, a new client contract that I'd agreed to finalize that very night. A promotion letter was tucked in there too, a moment I'd been waiting months for. But in that instant, none of it mattered. All I knew was that this woman, my wife, was close enough to this stranger to breathe him in, to run her fingers over his shoulder like it was something she did every day. I could feel the bartender watching me as I set down the letter, deciding I'd deal with work later. My whole chest was throbbing with this dull, pulsing rage I hadn't felt in years, if ever. It was like I'd walked into some twisted alternate reality where everything I knew had shifted without my permission. I wanted to look away. I wanted to walk out of that bar and leave her there with her secrets, her lies, and whatever game she thought she could keep up. But my legs stayed planted, like they wanted to burn that image into memory. Maybe some part of me thought if I stared long enough, she'd catch sight of me and be forced to face what she'd done. But she didn't even notice. That's when I realized that Amy had fully erased me in her mind the second she walked through that door that I left the bar. My mind a blur, and somehow found myself back home, sitting in the dark of our living room, replaying what I'd just seen. I must have watched the clock crawl past midnight, through 1, then 2 a.m. Amy wasn't even pretending to come home early anymore. I thought of calling her, but what would I say? Ask her how her night was, if she had a good time with the girls. At around 3, I finally heard her at the door. She was fumbling with her keys, laughing softly to herself. When she stepped inside and caught sight of me, her expression twisted from surprise to instant irritation, like my presence was the inconvenience. "What are you doing up?" she asked, slipping off her heels with an exaggerated sigh. I could see her lipstick was smudged, hair tousled like she hadn't even thought about how she looked coming home to her husband. "Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but I could feel the sharpness slipping through. "You were out with friends, huh?" She gave me a look that was all contempt, the kind of look that makes you feel an inch tall. "I told you I was out with Sarah and some of the girls. What's with the third degree?" Her tone. She was acting like I just accused her of some minor thing, like spending too much on a pair of shoes. The sheer audacity of it made my pulse spike. I took a deep breath, steadying myself, and said, "Yeah? With Sarah, right? At that place near 5th and Lexington." She faltered, just a flicker, but I saw it, and that's when I knew she hadn't planned for this. Her expression shifted, tightening just slightly. "How did you?" She caught herself, putting on a quick smirk. "Were you spying on me or something?" "Spying?" I could feel the heat in my chest, words finally breaking through. "Is that the story you're going with? Because I happened to be there tonight, Amy. And I didn't see Sarah or anyone else from your so-called girls' night. But I did see you." Her expression dropped, just for a second, and she looked almost cornered. But just as quickly, she rolled her eyes, brushing it off like it was nothing. "You know what, you're acting crazy. I don't have to explain every detail of my night to you, Tom. You're seriously going to flip out over something you think you saw." She was trying to deflect, pushing back hard like it was my fault for noticing her. I didn't even recognize this woman in front of me. Her whole face had shifted into something cold, almost mocking, like she was daring me to keep going. "So it was nothing?" I asked, my voice low, barely able to keep my temper under control. "Just an innocent night out with your friend? Because I saw the way you were with him. And I know I wasn't imagining it, Amy." She shrugged, looking at me with this infuriating calm. Maybe I had a few drinks, okay? Maybe I got too friendly with someone. But are you really going to make a huge deal out of one little moment? Are you really that insecure? Insecure. That word hit like a punch. She was twisting the knife, making it sound like this was all in my head, like my own doubts were the real problem here. But I'd seen it. I knew exactly what I'd seen. Still, there she was, standing in front of me, daring me to keep questioning, throwing out every excuse she could think of to sidestep the truth that I stood there, feeling like I'd just been shoved down a cliff by someone I trusted to keep me steady. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream at the sheer arrogance Amy had in standing here, spinning her lies as if she were talking her way out of a parking ticket. Insecure, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. You think this is about me being insecure? She sighed and crossed her arms, rolling her eyes again. Yes, Tom. I think you're making a huge deal over nothing. I can't even go out with friends without you acting like I've committed a crime. Do you know how controlling that sounds? Controlling. The word tasted bitter. I let out a humorless laugh. Amy, you didn't just go out with friends. I saw you tonight, saw you with that guy. And it was a hell of a lot more than friendly. I could feel the anger rising, creeping up into my throat, but I forced myself to stay steady. So let's cut the act. I'm giving you a chance here, just one, to come clean. She paused, narrowing her eyes like she was sizing me up. Then, with an infuriatingly calm expression, she tilted her head. Okay, Tom, if you're so sure of yourself, then what did you see? Exactly. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. I saw you leaning into him, your hand all over his arm. I saw your lips on his neck, Amy. For a moment, her face faltered. Just a flicker of surprise, maybe even fear. But she was quick, way too quick. In the next second, her face morphed into something colder, smug even, as she shot back. Maybe I had a little too much to drink. Maybe I was just having fun. You know, something you don't seem to understand anymore. My fists clenched at my sides. Having fun? That's what you're calling it. She shrugged, her gaze unwavering. You think you have it all figured out, don't you? You think that just because you saw one small moment out of context, you suddenly know everything. Her voice took on this mocking edge, each word dripping with disdain. But the truth is, you don't know a damn thing, Tom. Maybe if you paid a little more attention to me, you'd understand why I felt the need to actually enjoy myself for once. I was stunned. I'd expected her to deny it, make excuses, maybe even shed a tear. But this? She was turning it around on me, making me out to be the problem. Like somehow, her betrayal was a result of my failures, of my shortcomings as a husband. Enjoy yourself? I repeated, each word like a stone in my throat. Is that what you've been doing these past months? I thought you were out with your friends. Amy, I thought I was supposed to trust you. And now you're telling me it's my fault that you decided to cheat. She lifted her chin, defiant. Cheat? She scoffed. You're acting like I'm having some affair. Maybe you need to get a grip on reality, Tom. You're seeing what you want to see. Maybe I'm tired of living in a cage, where every move I make is under your microscope. Maybe, for once, I wanted to feel alive. Alive. She said it with this edge, this smirk, like she was proud of herself, like she was daring me to lose my cool, to give her an excuse to turn this all back on me. So that's what you're going with? I asked, my voice shaking now. You're not even sorry? Not even going to pretend? Her response was a cold, hard stare. Sorry for what, Tom? For enjoying my own life? For wanting something more than this routine? Her words stung deeper than I'd expected. She didn't just betray me. She was standing here, looking me dead in the eye, with no remorse, no guilt, nothing but a wall of indifference. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a lie. I was dealing with a version of Amy I'd never known. A woman I couldn't recognize anymore. And the worst part was, she didn't even care. The silence after her last words was heavy, like it had its own weight, pressing down on every corner of the room. She leaned against the doorframe with this strange calm, like she'd already washed her hands of whatever we'd built together. I could feel myself drifting between disbelief and anger, but her cold gaze grounded me right there, locking me into this miserable reality. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. So, you're telling me that months of sneaking around, lying to my face, it's just you enjoying yourself? Nothing more. Amy tilted her head, eyes flashing with something I couldn't place. Arrogance. Maybe even a hint of enjoyment at seeing me fall apart. If you want to believe it's some sordid affair, then go ahead. But sometimes, people just need more than the dull routine of marriage, Tom. And if that's a problem for you, maybe you should ask yourself why. She said it so easily, like she was discussing a minor inconvenience. It hit me like a train. Not only was she excusing her actions, she was acting as if I'd been blind to her needs, as if I were somehow at fault for her choices. Her defiance made me feel like I was the one on trial. You're unbelievable, I said, barely able to hold back. You didn't even have the decency to come to me if you were so unhappy. Instead, you're out there throwing away everything we built for what? For some stranger? For a thrill? Her face twisted into an annoyed sneer, her voice laced with sarcasm. Oh, please, Tom. Spare me the speech about what we built. Maybe if you actually paid attention to me, you'd realize that things haven't exactly been perfect for a while now. Or did you just assume I'd stick around forever, no matter how empty this all got? I blinked, stunned by her audacity. Empty? That's what you think of our life together. Amy didn't flinch, didn't waver. I think it became a habit, like going to work, brushing your teeth, folding laundry. This is all just part of your routine, and you expect me to fit neatly into it. Well, maybe that's not enough for me. Maybe I want a little passion, something that doesn't feel like checking off a box every night. I was gripping the edge of the table, every knuckle white as I struggled to hold back the urge to shout. You're saying that this whole time you've been faking it? Pretending everything was fine while you were, what? Looking for an escape. She shrugged, casually, as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb. I'm saying I've been playing the role you wanted me to play. The supportive wife, the perfect partner. But it's exhausting, Tom. And I'm done pretending. Every word was like another nail in the coffin of whatever I'd believed we had. I couldn't look at her without feeling this deep sense of betrayal, mingled with a sick realization that she'd been harboring this resentment for who knows how long. I took a step back, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath me. If you're so done with pretending, then why are you still here? I asked, voice barely steady. Why not leave, Amy? Why not end it instead of turning me into a fool? She raised her eyebrow, lips curving into a smirk that sent chills down my spine. Because it's not that simple, Tom. Divorce is messy, splitting everything in half, dealing with lawyers, the whole thing. Besides, you've made it pretty convenient here. A nice house, stability, everything set up just right. Why would I throw that away? And besides, her eyes narrowed, voice dropping to a near whisper. I never planned to get caught. The finality of her words was crushing. She hadn't even thought of ending things. She'd planned to keep up the lie, to keep using me as her safety net while she went off, doing whatever she wanted in the shadows. In that moment, I realized just how deeply she'd underestimated me, how confident she was that I'd turn a blind eye forever. But she'd made one crucial mistake. Her last words echoed in my head, the reality settling in. She never planned to stop. She thought I'd never catch her, that I'd stay right here in my role as the ever-faithful husband, oblivious to her double life. The realization hit like a slow, twisting knife, cutting through every ounce of trust I'd ever had in her. And the worst part? She didn't feel even a shred of remorse. I steadied myself, a strange calm taking over. So, let me get this straight, Amy, I said, my voice dangerously steady. You're willing to keep lying to my face, keep using me, because it's convenient for you? She gave me a shrug, utterly indifferent. Why are you acting so shocked, Tom? This isn't the 1950s. People get bored. They need more than one person to make them feel alive. I didn't sign up to spend my life as some housewife stuck in the suburbs, chained to a routine. My jaw clenched. You think I'm the one chaining you here? She scoffed, almost amused. You're acting like you don't get it, but I think you do, Tom. I think you know you've been half checked out for years. And maybe, if you were honest with yourself, you'd realize you're just as bored as I am. So why not accept this for what it is? We have a good setup, and maybe if you stopped acting like I'm betraying you, we could both get what we want here. Her words landed with a sickening weight. She wasn't just admitting her betrayal. She was suggesting that I go along with it, like some twisted business arrangement where we both turned a blind eye to each other. She saw our marriage as some kind of convenient partnership, a contract of mutual benefit, rather than any sort of real bond. "So that's what you want, huh?" I said, shaking my head. "A marriage where we both pretend it's all fine? You do what you want, I do what I want, and we just play house together." Amy's eyes gleamed, almost smug. "Exactly. You keep the image. I get my freedom. We stay comfortable. Think about it, Tom. You won't have to deal with any messy divorce, no painful nights alone. You can keep doing what you do best. Working, building your career, playing the role of the perfect husband. And I won't interfere with any of it." For a moment, I didn't recognize her at all. This wasn't the woman I'd built a life with, the person I thought I knew inside out. Her cold, calculated proposal left me speechless. She didn't want a marriage. She wanted a cover. And she expected me to just accept that, to be a willing participant in her farce. "You think that's what I want?" I asked, barely containing the anger lacing each word. "To be some background character in your life, covering for your double life? To live in a lie, just because it's convenient?" She looked at me with a mixture of pity and disdain, like I was some naive child. "Tom, you can act outraged all you want, but in the end, it's practical. This works for both of us. We both get stability, and no one has to end up hurt." "Hurt?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. "Amy, I don't know if you realize this, but there's no avoiding that now. You've already done more damage than you can imagine." Her expression didn't waver. She just looked at me like I was missing some obvious point, like I was too simple to understand. "I'm giving you a way to keep your life, Tom. You don't have to throw everything away over something so small." The sheer coldness of it, the utter lack of any conscience, left me speechless. For her, this was just another transaction, another way to stay comfortable. And the irony was, she thought she was doing me a favor, giving me a chance to ignore her betrayal, to keep the illusion alive while she slipped out whenever she wanted. She thought she could keep me here, caught in her carefully laid trap. But she was wrong. I wasn't going to play her game, and she was about to find that out. Her cold, businesslike proposal echoed in my mind, and something shifted inside me. Any remnants of love or loyalty I'd held on to dissolved in that moment. If Amy could stand there, laying out this twisted arrangement as if it were reasonable, then whatever bond we'd shared was already dead. She'd killed it. She just hadn't bothered to bury it yet. I took a step back, trying to create some space between us, needing air like I'd been holding my breath for hours. "So, that's it, huh? Your grand solution? You keep your freedom, and I get to stay in the dark like some obedient puppet husband." She gave a tiny, dismissive shrug, as if I were finally catching on. "Think about it logically, Tom. Why would you throw everything away? We have a life that most people would kill for. A nice house, stability. You're getting promoted, and things are going great for you at work. Why ruin it all over something that doesn't have to matter?" Something snapped. "Doesn't have to matter?" I repeated, incredulous. "Amy, how could this not matter? How could you look at everything we built, everything we shared, and think you could just replace it with some empty sham of a deal? Maybe because I'm not the one who's still clinging to some fairy tale idea of what a marriage should be." Her voice was as cold as steel, her gaze never wavering. "People grow up, Tom. They change. Maybe I changed, and you're just too stubborn to see it." Her words were like ice, and I felt myself freeze in response. "You think I'm clinging to a fairy tale?" "No, Amy. I thought we had a real partnership. I thought we were building a life together. But now I see. This has always been about you, hasn't it? Your needs, your freedom, your comfort." She raised her chin, defiant, almost daring me to keep going. "Is that really so wrong, Tom? To want more than this?" She gestured around, as if she were surrounded by some prison walls instead of the home we'd built together. "Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your work, so busy with everything but me, I wouldn't have had to find that more somewhere else." There it was. She was finally throwing out the blame, as if my career, my long hours, were an excuse for her betrayal. As if the life we'd built, the one she'd been more than happy to live in, wasn't enough because I had dared to actually put in the work to keep it afloat. "You're unbelievable." I said, shaking my head, a dark laugh escaping me. I've spent years building this life for us, trying to give us everything we wanted. And you're going to stand there and blame me because you decided it wasn't enough. She didn't blink. Maybe if you'd paid half the attention to me that you give to your job, we wouldn't be here right now. I felt a storm of emotions churning inside me. Disbelief, anger, even a sick sense of shame for the man I trusted her to be. She'd been waiting to throw that in my face, holding on to that resentment like a weapon, all while pretending everything was fine. And now, she thought I'd simply roll over and accept her terms, like I owed her the sick freedom she was demanding. So, this is who you are now? I asked quietly. A woman who feels justified in cheating, lying, and then blaming me for it all? Her face remained impassive, almost bored. This is who I've always been, Tom. You just weren't paying attention. The weight of her words hit hard, like she'd ripped open some hidden truth, some ugly reality she'd kept buried under the surface until now. And it was clear she had no intention of ever looking back, no intention of fixing anything. In her mind, she was blameless. But the difference was now I saw her for exactly who she was. And in that instant, I knew one thing for sure. I was done letting her decide the rules that I end that moment. I felt a clarity I hadn't had since this nightmare started. Her words, her contempt, they stripped away whatever hesitation I'd been clinging to. I wasn't dealing with the woman I'd married. I was dealing with a stranger who was willing to rewrite every chapter of our life together just to justify her own betrayal. I took a deep breath, letting the weight of it settle, and then I finally looked her in the eye. You know what, Amy? You're right. I haven't been paying attention, but I'm paying attention now. She narrowed her eyes, her expression shifting slightly, like she wasn't sure where I was going with this. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending too, I said, my voice steady. Done pretending that we can somehow keep this charade going, that there's anything left to save here. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. Don't be dramatic, Tom. You're just angry right now. This doesn't have to end like some cheap soap opera. We can figure this out. You'll see that my way makes sense. It's practical. Practical? I let out a dark chuckle, feeling a strange, almost surreal calm wash over me. The only thing practical here is realizing that you've been lying to me for months, years maybe, and you never even planned to stop. You want freedom, Amy? Fine. But it's going to come with consequences. She looked at me sharply, her confidence flickering for the first time. Consequences? What are you talking about? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let my eyes drift over the living room. The framed photos of us on vacations, the little souvenirs we'd picked up over the years, all the things that, up until tonight, I thought represented a real life together. I felt like I was seeing them for the last time. Tomorrow, I said, turning back to her, I'll be talking to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. You want out of this marriage? You can have it. A flash of genuine shock crossed her face. It was as if she'd never considered I'd have the backbone to actually leave. Her mouth opened slightly, and for the first time, I saw her stumble. You're actually serious? As serious as you were tonight, I replied, feeling a rush of strength with every word. You want to make this practical, Amy? Let's do just that. I'll be gone by tomorrow, and I'll make sure you get all the freedom you've been looking for. She stood there, staring at me as though I were speaking a foreign language. For the first time, her indifference started to waver, revealing a flicker of fear behind her eyes. Wait, she started, holding up a hand. Tom, let's not rush into anything. Divorce is complicated, messy. Do you really want to throw away everything just because of one night? Just because of some mistake? Mistake, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. This wasn't one night, Amy. This was a choice you made over and over. You chose to lie, to cheat, to use me as your fallback plan. So don't stand there and pretend this was just a mistake. Her face hardened, her expression shifting back to that steely, unapologetic mask. Fine, if that's what you want, then go ahead. Be the one to throw it all away. Her voice was icy now, dripping with resentment. But don't expect me to just roll over. You're not going to ruin my life just because you can't handle the truth. "Oh, I'm handling the truth, Amy," I said, taking a step toward her, finally letting her see the finality in my eyes. For once, I'm handling it exactly the way I should have from the start. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't wait to hear whatever new excuse she'd come up with. I turned and headed for the door, the silence behind me louder than any words she could have said. I didn't know where I'd go that night or what would come next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done with her lies, and done letting her dictate the terms of my life. In the dark silence of that room, I felt more alive, more in control than I had in years. I wasn't leaving because I was weak. I was leaving because I'd finally seen the truth, and I was strong enough to walk away from it. The next morning, I woke up on my friend Mike's couch, my head still spinning from the night before. I'd barely slept, replaying every word, every look on Amy's face as I'd finally told her I was done. I could still feel the shock, the disbelief, that moment her mask had slipped and she realized her plan had fallen apart. Mike didn't ask many questions when I'd shown up at his door late last night. He knew me well enough to see I needed space but not solitude. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already up, pouring 2 mugs of coffee, and gave me a quiet nod. "You look like you got hit by a truck," he said, sliding a mug across the table. "Feels like it too." I took a sip, savoring the bitterness, the jolt of reality. For a few minutes we sat in silence. I could tell he was waiting, giving me the room to speak, but letting me come to it on my own terms. Finally, I took a breath and told him everything. Seeing her at the bar, her reaction, her complete lack of remorse, and the cold, calculated way she'd proposed her arrangement. With each detail, I felt the weight lift just a little, the story solidifying, grounding me in the reality of what had happened. By the time I finished, Mike was sitting back, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. "Man, I don't even know what to say," he said, shaking his head. That's not just betrayal. That's a whole new level of cold." I nodded, my fingers tightening around the mug. It's like she didn't even see me as a person, just some asset, some thing that helped her live this comfortable life she's so proud of. Mike leaned forward, eyes sharp. "So what's the plan now? You really gonna go through with the divorce?" I thought about it, letting the decision settle in my bones. "I am. I don't see any way back from this, Mike. Even if she tried to apologize, even if she suddenly decided she wanted to fix things, I don't think I could trust her. Not after seeing how little she cared, how easily she lied." "Good," he said firmly, giving me a steady look. "You deserve better than that. And I'll help however I can, man. You're not going through this alone." His support, his immediate willingness to stand by me, gave me a new kind of strength. I'd spent so long internalizing everything, thinking that maybe I was the problem, that I hadn't done enough. But now, the more I saw things clearly, the more I knew that this wasn't my fault. This was Amy's choice, her selfish decision to destroy what we'd built. Around noon, I finally headed home to get my things. I didn't know if Amy would be there or not, and part of me hoped she wouldn't be. I wanted to get in and out, take what I needed, and start the process of moving on. But as I pulled into the driveway, her car was there, right where it always was, like nothing had changed. The minute I stepped inside, I felt her presence, like a heavy, unspoken tension in the air. She was sitting at the kitchen table, dressed in casual clothes, like it was any other Saturday morning. But as I walked in, she looked up, and I could see it immediately. The change, the vulnerability that hadn't been there last night. "Tom," she started, her voice softer, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" I didn't sit down. I stayed near the door, keeping my distance. "There's nothing left to talk about, Amy. I'm here to get my things." Her face twisted, a flash of frustration breaking through the calm she was trying to keep. "So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything we've been through?" "Everything we've been through?" I repeated, my voice sharp. "You mean everything I thought we'd been through? Because clearly, you've been living a completely different life than I have." She pushed back her chair and stood up, crossing her arms, her eyes flashing with some of that familiar defiance. "Look, maybe I made a mistake, but don't pretend you're some saint, Tom. You've been married to your job just as much as you've been married to me." There it was, the deflection, the attempt to shift the blame. I felt the anger bubble up again, but I kept it steady. You know what, Amy? You're right. I've worked hard. I've put in hours to make sure we had a life we could both enjoy. But I never lied to you. I never betrayed you. And I definitely never made you feel like you were just a placeholder while I went off looking for something better. She looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a second, I thought maybe she'd say something real, something honest. But instead, she let out a bitter laugh. Fine, go. If you want to throw this all away, be my guest. But don't come crawling back when you realize how lonely it is out there. I felt a surge of finality, the absolute certainty that leaving was the only choice. Her words were hollow, her threats empty, and any warmth, any love that I'd felt for her was long gone. I nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace. Don't worry, Amy. I won't be coming back. Without another word, I turned and walked down the hallway to pack my things, each step feeling lighter than the last. Packing up my things felt surreal. I moved through the bedroom we'd shared for years, picking up pieces of my life and realizing they no longer had any connection to her. Every photo, every small item that once held memories now felt tainted, hollow. I reached for my suitcase in the closet, and as I pulled it down, my eye caught a small, crumpled card at the back of the shelf. A handwritten note I'd given her on our first anniversary. I'd poured everything into that note back then, thinking it would be a keepsake of how far we'd come, a promise for our future. Now, it felt like a cruel reminder of what I'd believed in and how thoroughly she'd destroyed it. I stuffed it into the suitcase, a small act of closure. I didn't need reminders of what I'd lost. I needed to let go. As I moved to the bathroom to gather my things, I heard Amy's footsteps outside the door. She hovered there, silent, and then finally knocked. Tom. Her voice was softer now, less certain. Can I say something? I paused, gripping the edge of the sink to steady myself, then opened the door, meeting her eyes with a firm, unflinching stare. What is it, Amy? She stood there, fidgeting with her hands, the usual arrogance gone, replaced by something that almost looked like regret. I don't know what happened last night, she started, her voice trembling just slightly. I guess I didn't realize what I was doing until I saw that you were really leaving. I don't know. Maybe I was just trying to feel something again. Something different. The words were vague, almost aimless, but I could see she was searching for something. Anything that might explain her choices without fully taking responsibility for them. So what, Amy? You just wanted a thrill, I said, the edge in my voice undeniable. You didn't care who got hurt along the way, as long as you got to feel alive, right? She winced but held my gaze. It wasn't like that, Tom. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I don't know. I needed to figure out who I was outside of this marriage. I wanted to feel like I had my own life, not just this role you had me in. I let out a long, slow breath, shaking my head. Amy, no one forced you into anything. You had every chance to talk to me, to tell me how you felt. But instead, you chose to lie, to sneak around, and now you're standing here acting like it was all inevitable. Like you didn't have a choice. Her face twisted, a flash of defensiveness breaking through the vulnerability. Maybe you don't understand what it's like, Tom, to feel invisible in your own life, to wonder if anyone would notice if you just disappeared. I felt a strange pang of something, sympathy, maybe? But it was buried beneath the anger, the betrayal that was still so raw. Amy, that's what marriage is supposed to be. You talk to each other. You work through it. You don't just decide to blow it all up because you feel restless. She crossed her arms, looking away, as if she were weighing her options, deciding how much of herself to reveal. I just thought you'd always be there, no matter what, that we'd always have each other, even if I needed something else on the side. Maybe I took that for granted. There it was. She'd taken me for granted, seen my loyalty as something permanent, unbreakable, like I was some fixture in her life that she could treat however she wanted without ever facing the consequences. She wanted both worlds, the safety of me at home and the freedom to do whatever she pleased when she was out. Well, now you know that's not how it works, I said, each word clear and certain. You can't have both, Amy. You can't keep a life with me and still run off looking for freedom whenever it suits you. She nodded, her face paling slightly, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of real regret. "I know," she whispered. I didn't think it would come to this." I glanced around the room one last time, feeling a final wave of resolve wash over me. "Neither did I said quietly. "But here we are." Without waiting for another word, I turned, suitcase in hand, and walked past her, each step taking me further from a life I'd once cherished, a woman I'd once trusted. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. This chapter was closing, and I was ready to turn the page as I stepped outside, suitcase in hand. The morning air hit me like a wake-up call. The world felt brighter, sharper, as if shedding the weight of those walls had given me a new clarity. I loaded my things into the car, the quiet of the street around me amplifying every sound. The closing trunk, the click of my seatbelt. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, letting it all sink in. This was it, the end of everything I'd known for years, but also, strangely, the beginning of something else. Just as I turned the key in the ignition, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. Amy had come outside, standing on the porch in her robe, watching me. For a split second, I almost felt something, a memory maybe of better days before all of this. She looked vulnerable, maybe even lost, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. I rolled down the window, expecting her to say something. I thought she'd try to stop me, to reach out one last time, maybe even apologize. But instead, she just stood there, the faintest hint of a frown on her face, as if she were trying to understand how this was happening, how her plan had backfired. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, and I realized that whatever words she might have had, whatever part of her that might have once fought for us, had vanished with her lies. "Take care of yourself, Amy," I said, breaking the silence. She nodded, looking down, her expression hard to read. I thought maybe I'd feel satisfaction in seeing her regret, in watching her realize what she'd lost. But standing there, with her hollow expression and her half-hearted attempt to reach out, all I felt was a strange, empty sense of closure. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in my rearview mirror, and with it, the life I thought I'd be holding on to forever. The memories, the plans, the trust we'd built. They felt like shadows now, remnants of a story that belonged to someone else. I knew I had a long road ahead, one filled with lawyers, paperwork, the tedious process of disentangling our lives. But I also felt the faintest spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, the promise of a life beyond the mess, beyond her betrayal. The rest of the drive was silent, but it didn't feel heavy. Felt liberating. A strange peace settled over me, a quiet acceptance that no matter how painful it had been, I was free. Free from her lies, her twisted manipulations, her selfish version of love. Free to rebuild, to decide what I wanted out of life, without having to compromise for someone who would never respect me enough to be honest. By the time I reached Mike's place, that small spark of hope had grown into something stronger, something real. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked up to his door, ready to face whatever came next. And this time, I knew I'd be doing it on my own terms. Mike opened the door before I'd even knocked, probably watching for me from the window. He gave me a quick pat on the shoulder as I stepped inside, a quiet, unspoken gesture of solidarity. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said, but somehow, just standing there in the familiar comfort of his place, I felt a little more grounded. He nodded toward the guest room, where he'd set up a cot and a small stack of clean towels, ready for whatever came next. "Thanks, man," I murmured, managing a weary smile. He clapped me on the back, giving a knowing nod. "Anytime. Take all the time you need." Once I was alone in the small room, I sat on the edge of the cot, letting out a long breath. I was exhausted, every muscle tense, but my mind was finally clear. This place was temporary, a starting point, not an ending. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on my life, my needs, without anyone's demands hanging over me. I wasn't just escaping Amy. I was finally escaping the years of compromise, of keeping up appearances, of pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages, the flood of missed calls from Amy popping up one after another. But each time her name flashed across the screen, The sharpness of her words last night came back to me, hardening my resolve. I could almost hear her voice, that cold, manipulative tone insisting I'd regret leaving, that I'd come crawling back, lonely and desperate. But she'd underestimated me. She'd counted on the man who would bend, who'd make sacrifices, who would stay no matter what. But that man was gone. Instead, I sent a single message to my lawyer, confirming our meeting the next day.